So I want to give a talk on writing a great pull request. I've done a lot of work with Charles about like documenting your code. And whenever you do that, instead of saying what the code does, say what the problem is and what is your approach to solving that problem, and kind of letting the code like talk for itself. And hopefully you wrote like enough self-documenting code to where saying problem and approach is going to be enough of a solution for your documentation. And I wanted to take that in-code documentation and that style and apply it to what it means to write a great pull request. So this is a link right here, github.com/flexi/pull request template. And the README is written as if it was a pull request to add a pull request template. So it's kind of meta. If you look at it, hopefully you'll understand what's going on. And if you want to add a pull request template to a repo, you can probably just copy and paste that entire README and have that be the pull request. So I think that's kind of neat. So this is the structure of our pull request template. It's really simple, and you can customize it for your team or whatever project you have. But really, we just want to talk about the purpose, the approach, and what we learned. And I didn't pose this as problem and solution, because when you pose it as problem and solution, you tend to write about what the code is doing. And you're talking about the code for the code whenever you think about things in terms of problem and solution. So I got this from a client of ours and used purpose and approach. And it's something that has kind of dictated the way I use my language in a pull request. See, going through my speaker notes. So just like the README is structured in purpose, approach, and learning, this talk is going to be structured in the same way. So I'm going to start by saying, what is the purpose of this talk? And then how am I, like inside the talk, I'm telling you how am I approaching that, and then some of the learning resources that I had. So I decided to talk about this because we're in the business of writing pull requests. Right? The Frontside does podcasts and conference talks and meetup talks and open source software. But at the end of the day, what keeps the lights on is our clients and the software that we write for them and the software that we deliver for them. So I like to think that I'm in the business of writing pull requests because that's what I use to share knowledge with the team. That's how I make developers better. It's not this fine-grained Slack communication. People just can't keep up with that. There are too many channels. And I like to think that anybody who looks at a pull request is going to learn something, even if they're not the primary reviewer there. And that's the goal that I have when I write a pull request. And that's what allows us to charge our clients and let them feel like, hey, our team is getting better by hiring the Frontside, not just by the code they deliver, but by the knowledge that we're gaining by looking at their code and looking at their pull requests and their documentation. So that's why I say I'm in the business of writing these PRs.
Business is a boom.
Yep. So the purpose of this talk, I want to solve some common pull request problems that I see. And that is, they don't contain a description. It may be solving the wrong problem entirely. I've definitely gone down that road where I've just written the code and then I open a PR and somebody says, hey, this is not the right thing to do. And so I want to tell you about the approach that we use to solve that issue. I'm going to talk about the approach we use to solve each of these bullet points. Something I've harped on, word-splaining the code. The code can talk for itself. There's no reason to, right, like Englify. I don't know any words. Word-splain the code. Also, sometimes you get a PR and it's just talking way over my head. And a lot of the time that happens when you do word-splain the code. So let's go through the approach of solving each of those bullet points. Writing a description is really important. Right? I don't want to review a pull request that just takes the title and puts it in the description. That's not going to give me the context to be a helpful reviewer. All I'm really able to do if you don't have a description is I'm a glorified syntax checker, right? And there are plenty of linters that are capable of already doing that. So write a description, give the reviewer or your contributors some context for what the problem is and why this is a pull request and why it's open and what is the problem that you're trying to solve. So I wonder if I can click this thing. No? Oh, great. So you want to understand the problem early on in the process. And by doing that, you're not going to solve the wrong problem. And you're not going to go in this like huge roundabout way to make somebody's breakfast, which is what's happening here in this crazy Rube Goldberg. If you start your pull request, even before you write any code, with the problem and outlining it and sharing that with people, everybody's going to be on the same page about what the problem is, right? And what you're trying to solve. Like here, if I'm trying to make a delicious breakfast for somebody, breakfast. And then as you're writing your approach and your solution, somebody's going to say, hey, I think you're going about this the wrong way. So understanding what your problem is really key, and communicating what you believe the problem to be is super important. So we're explaining the code. I took this from Brandon because it's so good. It's one of my favorite tweets. But you want to let the code do the explaining for itself. And that's really, really hard when you're writing a pull request. I always want to say, well, the code is doing. No, you can't do that. You can't say what the code is doing. You have to say how the code, what is the code's approach to solving the problem. So, for example, if you're clicking, if your problem is like you're submitting a form and it has a loading state, your approach would be something like clicking the submit button shows a loading spinner in place of the button. Like that is your approach to the problem. Like how do we communicate UI properly for what is going on? The wrong way to write that, well, not the wrong way, but the word-splainy way to write that is we fire off an HTTP request and add an isPending class to the button, right? And that's kind of word-splaining the code. Like there's a whole files change section for that. And it's great, and it's highlighted super well. And if you want to talk about the code, that's a great place to do it, right? You can add a comment to any line, or now GitHub allows you to review things. So if you find yourself saying, these are the parts of the code that have changed. This code solves the problem because, or by, like if you're talking for the code, try to think about a different realm of explaining what's going on. And it's really hard. And every time I open a pull request, I still struggle with that. But if you do have to explain what's going on in the code or have to add some clarification, do that in line in the files changed. The last thing I want to talk about, or the last approach to the problems, is who is your audience when you're writing a pull request. And a lot of the times, yes, you're writing the pull request to be merged, right? The pull request just feels like this limbo document that sits in between you and shipping code. And there's somebody hovering over the merge button reviewing it. And if you follow these three approaches, which was what, like don't word-splain the code, write a great description, then I think you'll find yourself not writing for the merge button reviewer, but writing for all the contributors that could potentially be looking at this code, that's going to potentially learn something by looking at your pull request. And I think a great pull request will give people context and encourage them to go look at the code. And ultimately, that's what I want people to do, is I want them to look at the code, get a better context for the application or patterns or whatever it may be. So pull requests are for everybody to learn and contribute, not just for the gatekeeper that's going to give you your endorphins when they hit merge. And I mean, it's a great feeling when your code does get into master, but you don't write a pull request so your code gets into master. And I think if you write a pull request in order to teach people and have the understanding that everybody that looks at this is going to learn something, then I think you're also going to enjoy writing them a lot more. Which brings me to the learning section. And this is why there is a purpose, an approach, and learning. If you want everybody to learn something, if you look at the pull request, then yeah, it makes writing more enjoyable, as I said. So everyone that visits a PR should walk away having learned something. If you make that your goal, you're going to make your own life a lot easier, and you're going to make other developers' lives better. And so you put a lot of work into this code, and you did a lot of research. And you'll notice there wasn't a research phase. This is kind of where your final findings are presented, or in this learning phase. And you do that just by providing links to great blog posts that you read, or like maybe an awesome API endpoint that you didn't know existed before that maybe you want other developers to know and use. Tutorials are great if you had to go through a tutorial to get there. Or just a code example of a build tool that another library may have used that helped get you to where you were able to ship your code today. So this is my learning section. This really wouldn't be possible without GitHub templates and the pull request template markdown file. And then another resource, like not really about templates or structure, but just how to write a perfect pull request and how to be a good reviewer. This is a resource I found really helpful if you want to check that out. So again, hit your purpose, define your problem, make sure everybody understands what's going on. Your approach is really key to not just re-explain the code, but provide the context and insight to where when you look at the code, you know what it's solving. And you don't have to map through the data flow to know exactly what's going on. That's another good thing about the approach section, is you can kind of guide your reviewer to the parts of the code and the flow of the code. And that should be the approach. And the learning section is just to make everybody's minds a little bit brighter. So that is my approach, and hopefully our approach soon to writing a good pull request.
Accepted in the master. Merged. Approved. Get that template.
Rob. Rob hooked me up with that.
I had a question before you go. Before you shut down.
Yes.
I had a question and I can't remember it anymore.
Uh-huh.
Oh yeah. So as a reviewer, if you find, like, how do you communicate the encourage the generation of good pull requests? So you obviously have a standard. If someone's just coming in from the internet and they're submitting something, how do you get from, without discouraging them from their contribution, to say, hey, it would make my life easier and make you get a lot more out of this pull request, make me get more out of it, and that literally every other developer who touches this project get more out of it if you were to follow this.
Yeah.
How do you guide them along that process?
It's a really good
just have a
question.
link to your talk, I guess.
Yeah, just watch. It was 15 minutes. Right?
That's 15 minutes in
Writing pull requests is tedious and it's hard. And it's nice to have a little template to go along with that. If you're just trying to encourage somebody to write a better pull request or to make your experience as a reviewer better, I think the easiest thing you can do is encourage them to define the problem. And by encouraging them to define the problem, you're still allowing them to explain the code a little bit. But you can ask like, hey, what is this really trying to solve? And I think that is like the first baby step to writing a great pull request, because you can define the problem without any solution whatsoever.
Right.
So if you can define that problem without the solution, then you can gain that context, and maybe then most of your context will be gained from the files change tab. But I don't know if you have a better solution to that, or any ideas?
No.
Okay.
I think besides that, like having a template is the best thing you can do.
Having a template is
And
super
I think we
important.
should absolutely link to this talk right here in that template, and maybe that blog post.
Yep. That's a good point.
I think there was a point that you made that if you give this talk again, I think you should highlight it more, because it's really good, and I never thought about it this way. But you said something about, like, if you put this care and effort into writing a pull request, that it is actually like you're aiding your reviewers. Like you're not aiding like yourself. Like, this is a good thing for us to do, but by doing it, like, you stand to gain value selfishly by the fact that you will get better feedback on your own PR.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think that's a good way to put it.
And not only that, if you write a PR
As a copy and paste, right? Because you've written your pull request in Markdown, the wiki lives in Markdown, and you already have that there. All the work has already been put in. So people can reuse your code. It's a good point, Rob, because pull requests live as documentation, but people don't really refer back to them very much. I do in open source a lot. I'm like, let's go to a closed issue. Oh, it was resolved in this pull request.
exactly.
So
you follow back through the tree, and then you get to this empty pull request description with like 20 files changed, and you're like, well, what was the purpose of this?
Right.
Yeah,
What changed?
exactly.
And every time someone writes one, it's just my heart fills with gratitude for that.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, wow, thank you so much for having taken